Have you ever heard the term responsive logos before? If that's new to you, then this is going to be a good show because we're going to go over what responsive logos are, why you need them, and if you're a designer, why you should be providing them to your clients. Back in the day, when there were 800 by 600 pixel monitors, everybody had the same size of screen. And when websites first came out and were being created, it was great because you just had to design one version of the website and it would look exactly the same on every single screen that people had. So then bigger screens started getting created. Then mobile devices started to be capable of displaying websites online. The first ones were, horrible. But then you started being able to see entire websites. And the iPhone was the first phone that came out that you were able to see a full version of the website. You didn't have to have this special mobile version of the website. You could zoom in, you can read things. It was really, really cool. Well, then you had cascading style sheets really come on the scene, and people were able to target browser queries, certain widths of browsers, and then apply certain styles to those widths and make websites truly responsive, which means the website will actually change and you could target certain elements and have them look differently on different device widths, which enabled you to create a truly enhanced and engaging experience no matter what device you were on. And that's how websites are built to this very day. You can go to any website, grab the browser, decrease the width, and you'll see the entire website transform and accommodate that new width. And so responsive logos fall into that same idea where you may have plenty of width for the logo, but not a lot of height, maybe like in a website header. Typically those are about 60 to 90 pixels tall. There's plenty of width, not a lot of height. So having a logo that can fit up there is kind of important. But then there are other circumstances where you may not have a lot of width, but you have plenty of height. That could be on a print document, such as a pamphlet or some type of flyer where there's a lot of content and you want to put the logo in the bottom right, but maybe there's a lot of vertical space, not a lot of horizontal space. So a vertical version of the logo might help. And then you have the whole ecosystem of social media accounts and networks where you need to have an avatar that can very clearly be associated with your brand. So having some type of logo mark or symbol can be helpful there, or some type of design that is connected with your brand, and it's fairly obvious. And then you have, of course, not as important, but still an important part of your entire landscape of your brand is the favicon on the website browser tab. That little symbol up there that you have that can be identified with your website, your brand. I mean, I know I do. I've got like 10 million tabs up there, and all I see is a bunch of little icons. I can't even see the text, but I see, okay, that's Dribbble. That's one of my projects. This is my wireframing tool. This is Google Drive. This is Fiverr, and on and on and on, et cetera. I could see the little icons, and so I know which brand they're associated with. So you really need to think about all of these things because this fits into that entire landscape of your brand and all these different touch points that exist where people are going to be encountering your brand, and they need to be able to identify that content they are viewing or experiencing with your brand. And so how do you do this? Well, generally when I go to design a logo, sometimes you have a couple of different variations of logos that you could create. You'll have a combination, which is a logo mark or that symbol that you see with a word mark. You've got companies like Sprint, McDonald's, Rolex, Pepsi, AT&T, and you can look up several more of those. And then you've got companies that will just have a word mark like Samsung, Virgin, Google, even Coca-Cola, and so on. So how do you create an avatar or a favicon when you have a word mark? Because if you take that whole word and cram it down to a tiny size, you can't read the word. You can't recognize the letters. They're just tiny little blurs. So what do you do in those situations? Well, Google will take the G from the word mark and use that by itself as a logo mark. And then Samsung, if you just go to samsung.com, you'll see their logo in the top left. Look at the Favicon. It's the letter S. They just took the S from their logo and then gave it a blue background. If they got the blue is Samsung's color of choice, and so there's a blue background behind the S, and you go, oh, that's Samsung. It's easy to recognize at that point. So there's things that you can do like that. Coca-Cola, they'll often use the shape of their bottle, the kind of the old school glass bottles, and that becomes synonymous with their brand inside of a red circle with the white bottle. You could probably see that in your head. It's so ubiquitous. Combination logos like that are very versatile because they're very easy to display in a horizontal combination with the logo mark on the left and the word mark on the right, or switched. They can even go the opposite direction sometimes. And then you can display them as a vertical combination by putting the logo mark on the top and the word mark on the bottom, or again, switched. There's even something a little more complex than that called a stacked combination, where you may have the logo mark on the left, and then you may have 2 or 3 words, but instead of having those all horizontally, you may stack the words on top of each other. So you may have one word, another word beneath, and then the logo mark off to the left. That would be called a stacked combination, which you can display as a full-on horizontal combination if you have a bunch of horizontal space. And you can stack everything vertically too. The words are already stacked, so putting the logo mark on the top allows you to have this nice vertical version of the logo. And so you get a lot of versatility when you get into the design process, and you can create all of these different variations to be used in certain circumstances. So when another designer comes along and needs to make a flyer, a brochure, a website, social media posts, or anything like that, they can look through the selection of logos and go, oh, I need something that's a little more taller and thinner to use here. I need something a little more wider and not as tall over here. And I need just some type of symbol in the case of an avatar or a favicon or something like that. So it's nice to have all of those things planned out for and created so that they could be used in all these different circumstances. And this just helps to increase the visibility of your brand and people's connection with the brand wherever they happen to go and encounter it. So it's pretty critical to have this type of strategy in place. Like I said, it's not hard to do. You want to make sure that when you're getting a logo designed, you ask your designer to make sure that your logo is responsive. And they may or may not be familiar with that term, but they may understand the principle of a horizontal version, a vertical version, and then you could even say square or circle or avatar style version of your logo. And make sure that you have at least those, and that should really cover most of your bases. Now, some brands will actually have logos that are very, very complicated. They may have a very detailed script font, and they may have a lot of design elements and very intricate details in them. Now, in that case, if that's you and maybe you're an older brand and you have something like this that you've been using as your logo and you're trying to figure out, well, how do I use a version of this maybe on my website header? Because the one I'm using now is far too detailed and I lose a lot of that detail when I shrink it down. Then you may want to work with a designer and say, hey, I need a simplified version of my current logo that I could use in a variety of other contexts, right? So you may have this big complex version of the logo, but you could have another version where you strip away all those design elements, save for maybe a few, and then focus on maybe just the text, have a simplified version of the text. So you can take a very complex logo and simplify it down. A good designer will know how to do that. But that's what I've seen done in those types of cases, and that's what I've actually done in some cases. And you have a very complex design you're working with. You always want to have a simplified version that can be used. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why you'd want a simplified version. I mean, if you have a little pin or something that you need made and it's going to be cast in metal and you have far too many details, you have a simplified version of it. I mean, there's a million different situations that I think I've worked with where we've had to have designs ready or made to accommodate certain things. And so I've just done so many logos, and I've had so many situations where I've needed a specific version that I just always plan on having a simplified version of the logo. And that can often be a challenge to do. I mean, I try to make a logo as simple as possible right out of the gate so that even if it's just one color, just black on white, you can tell what it is. And it can be visible at a very small size. So that's one of the things I look for when I'm designing a logo. Now, sometimes it isn't possible simply because somebody's offering a luxury item. They want a lot of detail in there. It's necessary. Maybe they want to convey this really old style or retro look and feel, and they have all these flourishes and things. So sometimes it can be a challenge because you have to create that version of it, but then you just basically break it down into its core elements and you come up with a simpler version so that you have something to be used, like I said, on social media or in a variety of circumstances where an ultra simplified version would be necessary. Yeah, so some of this can get to be very complex, which is why it's important to find good designers and for existing designers to learn these skills and be prepared so that companies, when they try to execute these things, aren't going to trip over themselves and create bad experiences between them and their customers. You want to create those experiences to be as seamless as possible and make sure that clients have the design assets they need. So anyway, hopefully you learned something about responsive logos today. I did get out into the weeds with a little bit of things, but sometimes it's interesting to take a deep dive. There's a lot to it, and it's not very hard to do if you have a good plan in place and a good approach. You can execute these things fairly easily, and it's really inexcusable in this day and age to not have some type of responsive logo design plan in place. And like I said, even if you're an old business, you've been around for a while, you still, with a good designer, can get the design assets that you need and get taken care of and make sure all your bases are covered. All is not lost. So hopefully you learned something from that today. Hey, we'll talk to you again next time. Now get out there and create some greatness.